At 4 in the morning on August 16, 1945, young Indonesian revolutionaries entered Sukarno's home in Jakarta. Japan had accepted surrender. Allied authority had not yet arrived. The Dutch intended to return. For a few unstable hours, the old order still had weapons, but no one could say with certainty what would replace it. The young men had not come to arrest Sukarno for an empire. They had come to kidnap him into founding a country. Mohammad Hatta was collected first. Then Sukarno, his wife Fatmawati, and their 9-month-old son joined the group. Around 4, the vehicles moved east into the darkness. The men expected to declare Indonesia independent no longer controlled where they were going. 3 days earlier, Sukarno and Hatta had returned from a meeting with Japan's senior commander in Southeast Asia, carrying a promise: Indonesia could become independent. Then, Japan's war ended faster than the machinery built around that promise. Its military government had sponsored the committee meant to prepare independence. Now, the same defeated military was required to preserve the political status quo until Allied troops arrived. Japanese soldiers remained armed. Radio was controlled. Colonial power had not disappeared. It had simply lost a clear center. For Sukarno and Hatta, the safest route was consultation: verify the surrender, gather the preparatory committee, and prevent a declaration from becoming an unsupported revolt. For the younger activists, that route was already poisoned. If independence arrived through a committee created by Japan, the returning allies could dismiss it as the final trick of a defeated occupier. Delay did not look cautious to them. It looked like surrendering authorship. On the evening of August 15th, youth leaders met and sent Wakana and Darwis to Sukarno's house. Their demand was immediate: declare independence the next day without Japanese involvement. Sukarno refused to let an ultimatum replace a political decision. He intended to consult the committee. The argument became heated because both sides understood the danger and measured it differently. The younger generation feared that the window would close. Sukarno and Hatta feared that a sentence spoken without real control could send crowds against Japanese guns. One side saw hesitation contaminating independence. The other saw haste destroying it. After midnight, the activists met again. Persuasion had failed, so they chose isolation. They would remove Sukarno and Hatta from Jakarta, separate them from Japanese influence, and make delay impossible. The revolution had decided to take custody of its own leaders. Rengasdengklok lay roughly 85 kilometers east of Jakarta. It was chosen because local military connections offered protection and because approaches by Japanese troops could be watched. The journey was not stately. Before Karawang, the road became too difficult for the sedan. The group changed into an open pickup and continued toward a Peta barracks. Sukarno told the captives that, before noon, 15,000 people would enter Jakarta with students and Indonesian troops to disarm the Japanese. Sukarno and Hatta were being moved, he said, for their safety, and so they could lead the republic from outside the capital. It was an enormous promise. By afternoon, there was still no news of the promised revolution. At Rengasdengklok, the activists pressed again. Sukarno pressed back. The later accounts preserve angry exchanges, but memory is not a recording. What survives, clearly, is the disagreement beneath them. The youths could force the leaders out of the city. They could not prove that an uprising across Jakarta, much less an archipelago, would obey a timetable. Sukarno understood the distinction. Independence could be declared in a few breaths. Sovereignty required people willing to administer towns, carry messages, guard buildings, move food, and face soldiers who had not laid down their weapons. By late afternoon, the kidnapping had failed on its own terms. Sukarno and Hatta had not been converted by confinement. The promised mass action had not appeared, but the day had exposed something more important. Neither generation controlled the moment. They would have to create authority from an agreement neither side could win alone. This was not really a dispute over whether Indonesia should be independent. Everyone involved had spent years working toward that end. It was a dispute over where independence came from. From a committee formed under occupation? From young revolutionaries claiming to speak for the streets? From Sukarno and Hatta personally? or from the Indonesian people, millions of people who could not possibly gather in one room to authorize the sentence? The question would soon leave the road and enter the document itself. Who signed the page would determine who appeared to own the country's first public act. Back in Jakarta, the cancelled committee meeting had produced panic. Ahmad Soebardjo learned where the two leaders had been taken and traveled to retrieve them. At Rengasdengklok, he offered a guarantee. The proclamation would be made by noon the following day. According to the later account, he pledged his life to that deadline. The local commander released Sukarno and Hatta. Around 11 that night, the group returned to Jakarta. Then came the night's richest contradiction. The safest available place to prepare a declaration designed to escape Japanese sponsorship was the home of a Japanese naval officer, Rear Admiral Tadashi Maeda. Maeda did not write Indonesia into existence. He provided protected space while Indonesian leaders made the decision. It was assistance, not authorship, a distinction the entire night was trying to preserve. Before drafting, Sukarno and Hatta sought clarity from Major General Nishimura, a senior Japanese authority in Java. Days earlier, Japan had promised a route to independence. Now, surrender rules required its forces to prevent political change until the Allies arrived. The contradiction could not be negotiated away. Nishimura would not authorize the act. Sukarno and Hatta left without official permission. That refusal closed the final respectable door. No empire would certify the future. If Indonesia was to exist, Indonesians would have to claim the authority first and survive the consequences afterward. At Maeda's residence, Sukarno, Hatta, and Soebardjo moved into a smaller room and began to formulate the text. No one had brought a finished proclamation. Sukarno wrote by hand. The first sentence declared independence. Hatta supplied the practical second thought. Matters involving the transfer of power would be handled carefully and as quickly as possible. That was all. The page did not define citizenship, borders, ministries, money, recognition, or how control would pass from armed occupiers to a government that had not yet met. Its brevity was not proof that the moment was simple. It was a way of placing the political fact before every mechanism that could delay it. While Sayuti Melik typed the agreed version, the exhausted group went to the kitchen for food and drink. It was Ramadan and dawn was approaching. The people drafting a state paused for sahur, the last meal before the day's fast. Then they returned to decide whose names could carry the page. Hatta proposed that those present sign the proclamation. The room fell quiet. The problem was visible in the people around them. Some held positions inside structures created during occupation. A crowded list risked making the declaration appear to be the work of a Japanese-sponsored committee. Sukarno offered a narrower solution with a larger claim. Sukarno and Hatta should sign on behalf of the Indonesian people. The group agreed. 2 signatures could appear more independent than 30. They did not prove that every Indonesian had consented. They created a public authorship broad enough for people across the archipelago to accept, contest, and act upon. Before dawn, the document was complete. The deadline Soebardjo had backed with his life was now only hours away. Sukarno returned home exhausted and showing symptoms of malaria. He slept, took medicine, and woke again around 9. Outside, people gathered in the yard at 56 Pegangsaan Timur. There was no grand stage and no finished state protocol. Fatmawati had sewn the red and white flag. A microphone stood near the veranda. Indonesian guards watched streets still patrolled by armed Japanese soldiers. The crowd pressed Sukarno to begin. He waited. Hatta arrived about 5 minutes before 10. Sukarno would not read the proclamation without the man whose name stood beside his. At 10, the 2 men stepped forward. Sukarno spoke first about a long struggle that had risen and fallen but never abandoned its purpose. Then he read the short proclamation. The flag rose. Indonesia Raya was sung. The ceremony lasted moments. The claim inside it would require years of war, diplomacy, administration, and sacrifice to make real. The declaration began moving almost immediately. At the Domain News Office, Adam Malik used a shortwave transmitter while Japanese staff were away to send the news beyond Jakarta. Messages traveled by radio, print, and people. Across the archipelago, they arrived unevenly. Some communities heard within days, others much later. The images were nearly lost. Photographers Alex and Franz Mender had reached Sukarno's house that morning. Film was scarce. Franz had enough for 3 exposures: Sukarno reading, the flag rising, and the gathered crowd. Japanese forces caught Alex and destroyed his photographs. Franz escaped. When soldiers demanded his negatives, he claimed they were already gone. In fact, he had buried them near a tree behind the newspaper office. The pictures now used to remember the birth of Indonesia survived because, even after the proclamation, the old power could still hunt the evidence of the new one. On August 17, 1945, Indonesia did not suddenly possess secure borders, a unified administration, foreign recognition, or uncontested control. The proclamation opened the Indonesian National Revolution. Japanese forces still held weapons. Allied and Dutch forces were coming. The Republic would have to turn a sentence into institutions and defend them through armed and diplomatic struggle. But the document changed what every later struggle was about. The activists had feared that independence would arrive as another empire's gift. Sukarno and Hatta had feared that a declaration without political control would collapse into bloodshed. The final act belonged completely to neither strategy. It combined the youth's urgency with the older leaders' search for an authority that could endure. Before Indonesia had secure borders, ministries, or international recognition, it had 2 signatures: a handmade flag, 3 hidden photographs, and a sentence spoken before the old powers could stop it. 1 month later, on the roof of a hotel in Surabaya, another piece of cloth would test what those words now required people to defend.